society has collapsed. There's chaos everywhere you live. You can't trust anybody, everybody's out to grab your stuff. There's no food, you've been starving for weeks, you don't know what's going on. You're so hungry you turn into cannibalism. People are eating their own kids. It's crazy. This is Jared Diamond's description of what happens when Easter Island ran out of their primary resource that drove their whole society. You've got like trees, they were using to build everything, their homes, their tools. It protected their farms from wind. As soon as they used it all up, the whole society fell in on itself. He gives examples of other complex societies doing this too, like Viking settlements and that. Our primary resource is oil. It has been since the Industrial Revolution, oil and other fossil fuels like natural gas. It's a limited resource. It's going to run out one day. We need to face this fact and think about what we're up to. We depend on it for cars, the electricity in our homes, plastics that we use to make bags, shoes, tires, everything. Not only do we use it for everything, it also has negative impacts on our environment with the consequences of global warming, carbon dioxide release. You've got the occasional oil spills, things like that. I studied ecology and environmental science back in England, so I've got a bit of an understanding of what it means when a community is suffering from limited resources, and I've also looked at the data on climate change, and it seems convincing to me, so I'm hoping I can share some of my perspective with you today. I hope to convince you basically that we need to take steps to cut down our reliance on fossil fuels as best we can. Obviously it's not easy living in a place that's highly industrialized and heavily dependent on roads and cars for transportation. But with a few simple steps, hopefully we can all reduce our dependence on fossil fuels without turning into complete hippies. First thing I'm going to talk to you about today is peak oil. Peak oil, it's got a bit of a bad reputation in the media for some reason. People think some sort of, like, you mentioned peak oil, it's like you mentioned aliens controlling the government, and like there's a guy trying to watch me through my window. It's actually a very simple concept. Oil is formed from ancient phytoplankton and zooplankton that is formed in it died in a very oxygen-depleted environment and is subjected to heat and pressure over thousands of years. Right? It's a very slow, long process, and we use it up at a much higher rate than we could ever possibly manage to create it back, even if we figured out how to make it, apart from, I won't digress. I was going to mention there's biotech firms that are working on creating oil from algae, but that's not in my speech. As we reach peak production and it eventually starts to tail off, the amount of energy used to take the oil out of the ground and the increased demand and reduced supply will obviously increase the cost. You're going to have to pay more. You thought $4 a gallon was bad a couple of years ago, you haven't seen anything yet. The International Energy Agency states that production of conventional crude oil actually peaked in 2006, around 70 million barrels a day, and from now on it's going to tail off, and prices will peak in 2035 at a cost of $135 a barrel. This is the cost that it reached in a small blip in 2008, and many economists believe this is part of the reason for the global economic crash. According to British Petroleum 2010, in a statistical review of world energy, the US had passed its peak production in 1970. So there's a bit of information that it breaks down on country levels, so you can actually observe the process of peak oil and then tailing off. You've noticed that there's been a lot of talk in the media about how the US is more dependent on foreign oil these days than it used to be, and there was the oil crisis in the 70s around the time it happened. All of a sudden prices went up as the US was more dependent on OPEC. I to say. And in the media, it's been a big issue recently. The 2008 campaign for presidential elections, you heard the phrase "drill, baby, drill," right? It sounds weird coming from a British accent. Sarah Palin borrowed the phrase from Michael Steele, the Republican National Chairman, when she was in a debate with Joe Biden, which brought it to the national attention. There are actually very good reasons for the drill, baby, drill idea. People want to be energy independent, and because of the risk of being subject to foreign governments manipulating oil prices, the risk of terrorism disrupting oil supplies, things like that. But the problem with the idea is oil in the United States isn't a nationalized industry. It's not like Venezuela, where you've got all the oil production coming in straight to the country. So it doesn't actually do anything to contribute to the energy security of the nation. Much better would be to find alternative solutions, because all of the oil, well, not most of the oil drilled in the United States is drilled by multinational corporations such as British Petroleum, or BP as it's called, and they're allowed to sell the oil to anywhere in the world at the highest bidder. The top 5 places that oil exports go from America to Mexico, Canada, the Netherlands, Chile and Singapore. Of course you do maintain most of your oil for domestic production. On the subject of multinationals drilling for oil and disastrous BP, showing the exemplary state of British engineering, only in a country where the wrong kind of leaves fall on a train line, the whole place falls apart, could a oil rig in the middle of water catch fire. The largest spill in the Gulf of Mexico, it exploded, leaving 11 dead. 172 million gallons of oil leaked into the Gulf of Mexico, according to the Environmental Protection Agency. Ecological impacts, the long term, we don't know yet, but short term, 20% of the juvenile Atlantic bluefish tuna died, over 6,000 birds, more than 600 sea turtles, and nearly 100 marine mammals have been killed as a direct result of the spill, according to the ocean conservation charity Oceana. There was a knock-on effect to the economy of the region. New York Green Blog reports that thousands of square miles of federal and state waters were closed to fishing by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. 20% of the production of seafood in the Gulf region has been cut to 20% of its usual production levels. This has resulted in massive layoffs, and the job situation is really bad there. Tourism has also suffered. A poll by the Louisiana State Department of Culture, Recreation and Tourism indicated that 29% of those who plan to visit Louisiana on their holidays actually cancelled as a direct result of the oil spill. Disasters and economic impacts such as these are bound to increase as the oil is used up, and companies are forced to drill deeper and further out and in more unusual ground surfaces, such as oil shales. Another example of fossil fuels and technology is natural gas used in the production of nitrogen fertilizers. Leo Horrigan of the Johns Hopkins Bloomsburg School for Public Health says that the average US farm uses 3 calories of energy from fossil fuels to produce 1 calorie of food. This ratio was 1 to 1 in the 1970s, and it doesn't even include the transport and processing energy used. It's unsustainable, and as the cost of oil rises, the cost of making these fertilizers will increase, and the production and transport costs will increase, and food will become more and more expensive. It's not just farming that's unsustainable. Everything we do with crude oil and its products produces CO2 when combusted. It's a major greenhouse gas. The UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Britain's Royal Society and the US's Environmental Protection Agency have concluded there's strong evidence that the use of fossil fuels has contributed to climate change, and the risks associated with climate change are substantial. We've already had the risks of climate change. demonstrated. Okay, now give me all the doom and gloom. Let's give you a few quick tips. We can switch away now.